So I'm just going to go to our next panel. So grateful to have everyone here with us today as well. This is our fourth and final panel discussion for today. And what we'll be doing is exploring how jihadist groups effectively create a sense of belonging for individuals who may feel isolated or marginalized. This sense of community can be a powerful lure, offering refuge and a purpose to in an increasingly fragmented world. You see the people who are, lonely, the lone, lone kid in the corner. Those are prime targets oftentimes, and they are absolutely brought in and lured in with that sense of belonging very misleadingly. Joining us are three very insightful experts. We have Dr. Sylvester Okere, who will share his experiences from Nigeria. Dr. Sylvester, if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly, please forgive me, and I'd love to know the correct pronunciation.
Thank you.
He's from Nigeria, where local jihadist groups like Boko Haram have manipulated community dynamics to attract individuals seeking a sense of belonging amid instability and economic hardship. We also have Sam Westrop, who will provide a critical perspective from Western Europe, where jihadist groups often exploit fears of racism to deflect scrutiny. He'll discuss how the fear of being labeled as a racist has silenced communities and allowed for radical ideologies to thrive, referencing significant events such as the San Bernardino shooting and the case of Tashfin Malik, which I brought up earlier as well. And finally, we have Romany Shaker, who will delve into the global landscape of jihadist groups, highlighting how they foster loyalty and community across borders. He'll examine the communication strategies these groups employ in order to maintain their support structures in our ever interconnected digital age. As we engage in discussion, I encourage the panelists to draw out on their own experiences as well, so we can understand what the challenges were that they faced, are still facing, and the challenges that we're going to be facing in countering these narratives and support systems that really exist all among us, around us. I see everyone's here, perfect. I'd love to start out with, asking a question of you, Sylvester, Dr. Sylvester. I'd love to see if you could tell the audience today how, in your experience in Nigeria, right, you have local jihadist groups like Boko Haram, which didn't get enough media attention, frankly, and then sort of tapered off and it was during Obama's presidency, from what I recall, when they first started kind of gaining traction and then resurfaced again after being forgotten for so long, kidnapping all these little girls. They created really strong support structures that attracted individuals seeking refuge and a sense of belonging. How have other groups, local jihadist groups like Boko Haram, done this as well in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm so excited to be on this panel. This morning I was thinking to myself, I said, this is evident that we cannot achieve a peace through politics or politicians, but I think the only way we can achieve peace is what we are doing right now, because this is a component of Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, everyone, atheists, coming together to find solution, because our political leaders have disappointed us. And I love the part that I had a little bit in the last session. Many people do not know that some of these politicians are really funded and empowered by these terrorist groups to defend their ideologies. Some of them indeed are terrorists, and some of them are actually some of these jihadists, whether in America, in Africa, wherever it's happening, because I see no reason why nobody can rise up and stop what is going on. Coming from Nigeria, I'm from the eastern part of Nigeria, Imo State, but I lived my life in Kano State, which is actually, Nigerians will refer Kano State as the Jeddah of Nigeria. I mean, Saudi Arabia of Nigeria in terms of Muslim, because there is no born Christian in Kano State. We that live there, we are like, we are the Christians that come from other states. But it's a very beautiful state, because not all of them have that mentality. I have so many of them that are good friends of mine. I lived 18 years in Kano State as an immigration officer. Until today, I still have a strong root and connections, friends that are very, like-minded, want progress, want good of everyone. But unfortunately, they cannot speak out because of what is happening. If they speak out, they will be attacked, they will be killed. And even those of them that it maybe changes religion, see the light to, become a Christian, the very first thing they're going to do is to move out of that state because they're going to kill them. Here in the US, I have a lot of I have many Muslim friends and so on. So I'm saying this to make us understand that it's not all of them that have this kind of a evil mindset. There are great Muslims, but those of them that are doing that is because they are being empowered, they're being sponsored, and again, politicians are not trying to do anything to stop it because it's helping them to push their agendas, it's helping them to win election. Those are their grassroots, and it's helping them to kidnap. How did kidnapping start in Africa or in Nigeria? It's through this fight between a politician and another one. If they want to eliminate you, if they want to intimidate you, they send kidnappers, they send thugs, and so on. So, and yeah, go ahead.
No, this is great. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to ask you a question, follow up to this, right? There's so many tools that are used to recruit these individuals, correct, into the jihadist platforms like Boko Haram, other jihadist groups in Nigeria, right? Which you said is like the Jeddah of Nigeria, where you're from. There's been a lot of discussion and debate around this, right? You've worked with sub-Saharan advocacy groups. Is there any merit to this academic suggestion that the lack of economic opportunity and political instability contributes to the growth of jihadist movements there in West Africa? People because oftentimes what they'll do is, I believe, and you can talk more about this, is that they'll use these groups will take underprivileged, impoverished, let's say, members of the society and give them economic opportunity, whether it's electricity, food, and that's the way they lure them in and recruit them in the madrasas. Is that an experience that you've actually personally witnessed?
No, I don't think so, because even we Nigerians, generally, we even say that the Northerners, that's the Muslim states, benefited much because, for instance, oil is one thing Nigeria brag about, but the oil is not benefiting the oil producing states. It's been benefiting those over there. I think it's the problem of leadership, who manipulate those little kids. And it's from education. They don't allow them to go to school. They teach them every morning, wake up overnight reciting the Quran over and over. They don't even let them dress well. They expect them to be begging on the street, giving them place and everything to ask for food. That's why I always say people about Chinese proverb that I love so much. You say, when you teach a man how to fish, you have fed them for the time. But if you if you give him a man a fish, you have given him food for the time. But if you teach him how to fish, so these people do not want to let these kids grow up, open their eyes, teach them, establish them. So they prefer keeping them that way so they can use them. So it's not lack of everywhere has the same lack of economic opportunity. They are more benefited. Their leaders are wealthy. They produce more millionaires even than other parts of Nigeria.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to jump over now to Sam, who's in another part of the world. And, you've done in Western Europe a lot of work and throughout the world, obviously. I'd love to know, in light of Israel's recent elimination of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, do you think there will be attacks on Europe and US soil?
No, I think that's unlikely. I think most of the violence in Western radical movements comes not from the Islamists at the moment, but from the far left. That's increasingly clear. There are ties between certain elements of the far left and foreign Islamist powers, but by and large, Islamism has not been organized since October 7th in the West. It has let other radicals, non-Muslim radicals, take the lead. You saw that in the encampments. And as close as we get to actual violence, it tends to be folks backed by CCP or Russian interests, moving money and influence into radical movements. So no, now the exception here is the Hezbollah networks that exist already in the West, and there have been a steady stream of indictments by the US government, certainly, of Hezbollah operatives planning violence, assassinations, all sorts of things, sometimes in cahoots with Mexican drug cartels, sometimes attempting to hire assassins to kill Iranian dissidents and so on. But the speed of and the frequency and the severity of those threats hasn't really increased post October 7th. It's as bad as it is now as it was before October 7th. So the threat from Islamism as it relates to Hamas and Hezbollah is not a violent one. It's a pernicious, lawful one. It's the subversion of Western institutions. It's something far more dangerous in the long run, even if less spectacular in an explosive sense.
So what you're saying is actually, I want to do a follow-up to that before we go to our other speaker, Romany. You know, it's money, ideological support, and networks that are tied to not only terrorists, but these radical groups. It goes back to the red-green axis, right? These left-wing Marxists and the Islamists, jihadists, if you can call them that, right?
As it relates to Hamas and Hezbollah, yes, I think largely true. If you expand it to Islamism more broadly, the Salafis, the Deobandis, the Jamaatis, then it's no longer just a red-green axis. In fact, the left is very uninvolved with a lot of those movements. You start to see more far-right involvement increasingly with some of them. There's some very interesting things going on right now. You might have seen the President Trump, or the presidential candidate Donald Trump, was endorsed by the mayor of Hamtramck recently. Hamtramck is an all-Muslim town run entirely by Islamists in Michigan. He is a hardline Islamist, hardline Salafi, who has horrible ideas about black people, about gays, all the classic sort of Islamist hateful tropes. Very interesting that he and his supporters are now aligning themselves with the Trumpian GOP. So lots of interesting things are happening. It's not always as simple as the red-green alliance. In the case of Hamas and Hezbollah, that absolutely applies. But you mentioned one other thing, and that's money. Now, money is key. Yeah, money is everything. You're absolutely right. Money is everything, and most of it moves lawfully through vast charitable industries set up by all these different Islamist networks. And since for the last 200 years now, Islamist movements have primarily established themselves through welfare operations. So I think Boko Haram was mentioned earlier. Boko Haram operates a very extensive welfare charitable operation in London, initially moving through something called the Al-Muntada Trust, but now for a series of mosques based in the country, or fundraising and recruiting for Boko Haram. Al-Qaeda, when it took over Mali, set up hospitals, set up prescription services, set up doctors, all because they know that terrorism and jihad is one part of Islamist control. The other part is dawah, proselytization, and they do that through welfare, through social means. And Hamas and the Brotherhood are exactly the same. So yeah, money is everything. Now I fear I can speak for way too long on this subject, so I'll stop now. I'll come back to it.
There's absolutely not enough to discuss it. I want to just add before I go to Romany, do you think, Sam, it's possible that Mayor Amir Ghalib of Michigan, actually his endorsement of Trump was tongue-in-cheek, kind of like Vladimir Putin endorsing Kamala Harris, or do you think he really wanted to endorse him?
No, it's sincere. And in fact, all across Michigan, we've seen not just Islamists embrace the GOP, but the GOP embrace Islamists. It's a new demographic for them. And CARE is even doing this in places like Virginia, because they see an opportunity to work with the right over issues such as LGBT, gender politics, all this stuff. Turns out, actually, that Islamists are quite conservative in a lot of ways, and that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And so, as much as they're willing to betray those values to work with the left, they're also willing to recapture those values to work with the right. Islamists will exploit everyone. Let's not forget that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump now to Romany. Thank you so much for joining us today as well. It's great to see you. I want to ask you, you've been doing really amazing work also monitoring global jihadist groups. Could you share with our audience, based on your experience, what are the most common methods that these groups use to build community and foster loyalty among their members?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you, Adelia, and thank the co-panelists in this discussion and this conference. Well, based on what I'm seeing online, so in terms of my research and my monitoring, I focus on, I just try to connect the dots, basically, in terms of focusing on trends, propaganda, literature, focus on kind of what is the call for action here and where it is. And basically, that provides us with an avenue to explore the methods of recruitment and basically winning the hearts and minds of these local communities. Just to touch on what Sylvester was saying earlier, basically in Africa, the trajectory, what we have been seeing so far in terms of ISIS, for example, those recruiting in Africa comes through various means. For instances, exploiting the local grievances, because what I have been noticing is one of the most significant things about the trajectories of ISIS is the pivot towards Africa and focusing more in Africa in terms of West Africa, Central Africa, and now going all the way to the East. And that includes several countries like Somalia. We are talking about DRC. We are talking about Mozambique. We are talking about West Africa, Nigeria. There is also the Sahel branch in terms of Central Africa. The Sahel branch mainly focuses on Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And there I have to highlight that the kind of rhetoric or narrative that ISIS is presenting is totally different from other parts of the world, exploiting the colonial background in terms of the French occupation. And now we are talking about the Wagner mercenaries. So we have been seeing these as methods to co-opt the local also separatists in certain parts of Africa. So the mechanism is totally different from other parts of the world. For example, foreign fighters. And just to touch on what Sam was saying, there have been a number of incidents where some sympathizers or maybe people who pledged allegiance to ISIS, who actually, due to the vigilance of the security forces, law enforcement, they have been arrested in several parts of Europe, Belgium, Austria. We are talking about Italy as far as October 4th. A guy from an Egyptian origin actually has been arrested for actually planning an attack on a church, and in some other parts, a synagogue. So that's so the message in Africa is different from that is to the global audience. And here I have to highlight that ISIS, to promote that message, they actually depend on focus on using actually a translation, and that means providing an English language material that in terms of posters, videos, or as recent as now exploiting the new technology as AI. We have seen a news bulletin recently by ISIS, by actually pro-ISIS. It's called Hasad al-Ikhbar, which is like a news harvest, where they actually use an animated generated AI person to say or read out the actual news bulletin. So that's very interesting how what are the methods that they are using to reach this audience.
So you've actually touched on another question that I was literally going to ask you, which has to do with, these global jihadist networks communicating and maintaining their support structures across borders using digital, the digital age of available technologies, AI. I mean, it seems ISIS, even though they've been kind of forgotten, but they're still there. They're still vying for relevancy, and they're probably going to look for any opportunity to continue pushing, right, for themselves to create the caliphate that they dream of happening in their lifetime. Do you see that? You see them making kind of a resurgence due to the advent of technology and AI, as you said, they're using it to their advantage?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, whether or not the Islamic State or ISIS, or IS as I call it, just to make it shorter, is still a threat. So the answer to that question is yes, of course. However, if we had this conference, for example, at the end of last year, I would describe the ISIS threat as diminishing or dropping a little bit. But this year clearly shows that the ISIS activity, unfortunately, has surged. And when I say has surged, I'm starting this year. For example, I give you a quick overview of what happened basically in this year. First of all, we had the twin suicide bombing in Iran, which killed actually 100 people. And ISIS is very opportunistic in the sense that they really want a media attention just for relevance. They seek relevance, and this is one of the things they do, is when they see a vacuum or launching such attacks would give them actual media attention. So, for example, the attack in Iran was actually at a procession that was commemorating Qasem Soleimani, the 4th anniversary of his killing by U.S. airstrike in Iraq, followed by an attack on a Roman Catholic church in Istanbul that was actually also for attention in Turkey, that killed one person. That was followed by the March attack at a concert in Russia. And people have been talking online, why Russia? Why ISIS focusing on Russia? They said, of course, Russia. We are really interested in Russia, not because of this. They had these wars against in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, and all these things. So we have to focus on Russia. The idea here is to actually get some actual media attention. In 2004, actually, there was another attack in places of worship, 2 churches and a synagogue in Russia, Southeast Dagestan. So that also for media attention. And go ahead. Sorry.
Dagestan? You said Dagestan?
Yes.
Isn't that where Hezbollah is from? Hezbollah, the small gentleman who is like a media sensation?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting also. Yeah, that was a very interesting thing, because a side note I would put here. Amid Israel's war on Gaza right now, Dagestan also made global headlines. When on October 29, 2023, there was a crowd stormed this airport to protest against a flight from Tel Aviv. And the crowd chanted anti-Israel slogans, and this prompted the temporary closure of this airport, right? And in this, at least 60 people were arrested. Russia blamed Ukraine, as they always do, and the West for the airport. But we know that there is actual base that is very Islamist based in Dagestan, and they are being radicalized by the ISIS, the Islamic State propaganda in this region, and they are very active. And just like the concert attack, you can expect those cells to actually shut down an airport at a certain time.
Wow.
And yeah. So that's also let's not forget what happened in Oman, the Gulf Sultanate, Oman. There was an attack in July 16 this year this was the first actual Islamic State attack in the Gulf, at least in the Gulf Sultanate, Oman. And this one, there were 3 attackers, and the ISIS claimed responsibility, and they said it is against the Shia in Oman because of their connection with Iran, because they see Iran as an apostate state too, that is has been doing nothing for Jerusalem or Gaza. So that's also another thing. And this was framed by the Islamic State as actually, look, we are doing for Gaza, but there was no connection here. But
But it's interesting. It's very good that you brought that up, because I wanted to go back to you, Sylvester, and to ask you, because Romany is talking about how there was recent fallout in different parts of the world over the incidents that occurred in the Middle East, and specifically even in sub-Saharan Africa, right? There was an assassination attempt recently against the UAE. United Arab Emirates ambassador to Sudan last, I think about a week or two, like 2 weeks ago or so, a week or two ago. So I guess that we can say that even the recent fallout in the Middle East has had an impact, even in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So
Mhm.
have you, that said, I'd love to know, considering, the work you've done studying sub-Saharan Africa and the community's, roles in enabling or resisting jihadist movements, can you possibly share any examples of how communities have not just supported, but also rejected jihadist ideologies?
Yeah, but all of these things, if the political leaders are not really, and the media are not also projecting what is going on, you see, no matter all the efforts, there is defeated. Recently, on October 1st, it happened in Makurdi, Benue State. Go to Plateau State, is always what happened in Israel October 2023 happens daily all parts of Africa, Nigeria specifically. If it's not in the east, it's in the west, it's in the north, it's in Abuja, and so on. But the question is, are the media covering it? Are they projecting it? They are not. Yeah, the politicians actually reacting on it, they are not. If you remember, how can you have a handshake with an evil person or someone who killed or someone who sucks blood? I will start from the administration of President Obama. 2019, when in Sri Lanka, people were, there was an attack on the Easter Day. What did Obama and Hillary Clinton label it? Easter worshippers. But when it happened on the other side, they react differently. So when politicians are having a handshake or romancing these terrorists, it emboldens them. And when the media is not covering it, and some of them, especially in Nigeria, I would say some of them are afraid to speak because the owners of the media house or most of their bosses are all these people too. If you speak, maybe you'll be fired or you'll be attacked and so on. That is not helping the society. And that's why I said earlier on that the politicians are not going to give us the peace we want. We are the one to take it by force. What we are doing now, having different religion, different tribes, because we all want basic thing. We all want security. We want our children to walk safe on the street. We want our women to walk safe in the market. We want our women to, appear the way they want to appear, dress the way they want to dress, go to school if they want to go to school, not subjecting them to sit down at home and only come out in the night with covering faces. It doesn't make you holier than thou or anything. So they are not really coming up to say, okay, let us arrest this. There was a leader in Nigeria, late President Sani Abacha. I always remember his quote. He said, if terrorism lasts more than 24 hours, the government's hand is in it. And that is very simple. If it lasts more than 24 hours, the government's hand is in it. And that's why I always say this is political. They know what they are doing. They can stop it if they want to stop it. I'll give you an example. When Dover Patrick was the governor of Massachusetts, when there was a marathon bomber, what a leader should do, that's exactly that's why I respect that man. He shut down the city. It cost the city of Boston 333 million a day. He shut the city down to get that individual. So if a president, a governor, a city council or whatever want to stop this, they can do it. And also even our political leaders here, because I asked my fellow Nigerians or Africans, why do we go to the Congress almost every month talking to somebody, educated people? Is it that they are not hearing us or they intentionally don't want to do anything? The book of Proverbs chapter 3 verse 27 said, I will read it. He said, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it is in your power to help them. If you can help your neighbor now, don't say, come back tomorrow and then I will give it to you. So why do we come to you and you know what to do? A quote said, if you see a snake, kill it. Don't call a snake committee or snake handling committee. When you see evil, don't shake hands with them. Don't give, Obama used to call them, instead of ISIS, they call them ISIL. You don't change their name. You don't beautify their name.
The JV team, junior varsity.
Thank you.
Yeah. So exactly, as my father likes to say, he's a very wise man. He goes, "There is no tomorrow. You got to do it today." So it's very, very relevant.
So that makes them to feel like, you know what, we got them. That's why I said earlier on that some of these politicians are terrorists themselves. They are being elected, funded, empowered to be there to speak for the. And I will hate to say this, including I and Omar. How can you be there, Africa, where you come from, that you and you are in the Foreign Affairs Committee, instead of you to fight this evil that is happening in Africa, all you want to promote is nonsense. Excuse my language, it's pure nonsense. So these politicians know what is giving them backup. And that's why the radicalization, if we don't take time, what happened in 9/11 will happen again because they are trooping into the country.
Understandably so. And unfortunately, a lot of this has to do with the financial backing, that it's so financially lucrative for these leaders. And it's the reason why war and the incitement of it and the incitement of this violence continues unabated. I just want to, before I get to you, Sam, again, I want to just return to a poll that the audience members may have seen. The question is, which country in the world had the highest per capita recruitment for the Islamic State? And the choices were Pakistan, the US, the Maldives, and Bangladesh. And the answer is the Maldives, something I didn't even know. So there you go, the more you know. Very, very interesting. Sam, I wanted to, we have actually a question also from an audience member here. There's always someone who benefits from appeasing the jihadis, either politically or geostrategically. How do we deal with this going forward? So I was talking about the financial benefits, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a big question because we should probably define who we mean by jihadists first. And apologies for twisting your question slightly, but I think it's an important point to make.
Any group, any individual that believes that they must kill or oppress others for having a belief that is completely different than their own.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. And I think I can agree with you on a literal definition, but in terms of who are the jihadists, rather, that's a more perhaps an interesting question. We've spoken about Salafi jihadists. So far, we've talked about Hamas, Hezbollah, we've mentioned Boko Haram, and so on. But that's by no means all of it. We now have the Taliban in control of Afghanistan once again. We now have a Malaysian government run by Anwar Ibrahim, a man who graduated from Western Islamist schools and is promoting Islamism in all forms over there. And of course, East Asia has its own jihadist problem. We have Bangladesh now increasingly in the hands of Islamists and maybe jihadists after the next election. All across the world, and especially in West Africa as well, all across the world, new forms of Islamism are taking root, and jihadist elements within those Islamist movements are appearing as well. This isn't a single movement. These are different movements. They're not united by any one backer or donor or agenda. Their caliphates would look very different depending on which jihadist group you're speaking about. So this remains a global crisis, and it is not just one enemy. The most important issue is for the West is not the geopolitical threat of the Taliban or of a new Bangladeshi Islamist government or of Pakistan under its increasingly turbulent political landscape. The question, I think, is the growing radicalized domestic problem of Muslim communities under the thumb of Islamists, under the thumb of radicals. And in Europe, that looks particularly bad. And France and the UK especially have to deal almost every day with some new problem or outrage or terror. We now have MPs elected in the last British Parliament who are openly Islamist, and are the future of politics in Europe is looking increasingly dangerous. America is far off that, but we've already discussed Hamtramck in Michigan, and that is perhaps a harbinger of things to come. So there are all sorts of forms of threats. Jihadism is just one of them. The lawful, pernicious threat through subversion and through demographic changes, of course, also worth discussing and noting. There's no shortage of things that need to be done, and sadly it's not as simple as working with one axis or alliance of forces in opposition to another. This is a very complicated situation. If we are talking about, say, something like the Salafi jihadist threat, as Romany rightly points out, there has been a very significant resurgence of ISIS in the last few years. But on the whole, Salafi jihad is in decline, while other forms Jihad, Deobandi Jihad, for example, is very much in ascendance. So there are new forces to consider. I think part of that has to include understanding that non-Muslim forces are aligned with some of these Islamist threats. Russia and China are particularly dangerous, not just because of their backing of Iran, but because of their closeness to Pakistan as well. Both Sunni and Shia Islamism is increasingly backed by a CCP Putin axis that needs to be considered at every level. Now, it would be also very naive to deny that CCP and Russian monies are coming to the West, where they're backing Islamist and other radical protests here. We already spoke about the encampments. We know that Russian and Iranian and Chinese money funded the encampments. We can only assume they're working their way into other forms of radical protest as well. So there is just an utterly huge amount to consider here. Go ahead.
I heard about the other two. I didn't hear about Russian money, honestly. That's very interesting and illuminating. Very interesting.
Oh, for sure. And if you look, in fact, if you look at groups like the Singham Network, Neville Roy Singham, very important philanthropist who runs groups like the People's Forum. He's married to a woman called Jodie Evans, who runs Code Pink, so that ties in other things as well. All these groups take CCP money and push pro-Putin rhetoric. One of the mysteries for me, and I know I'm speaking to a Hindu organization here, one of the mysteries for me has been the failure to understand how anti-Indian these forces are as well. Russian, Chinese, and Iranian forces are. They push a lot of the pro-Kashmiri jihadist rhetoric here in the United States, while trying to pursue better relations with India geopolitically at home. So there's just an enormous amount to consider here, and I wish it were as simple as a black and white alliance versus axis situation, but it's not. There are so many forces at work here, and one of the best things the West could do is pit these Islamist forces against each other. I think that would help enormously. There's a huge split going on right now, just by way of example. Within the West, there's a huge split going on right now between those within Islamist camps who want to move further to the left and embrace liberalism, or rather progressivism, as their ally, and those who want to move to the right and work even with, there are discussions about working with neo-Nazis. By neo-Nazis, I mean literally people covered in swastikas. And there are discussions happening right now between certain Salafis and neo-Nazis in Europe and in the US about this. This split should be encouraged. The more Islamists are divided, the more the greater the obstacles to them uniting the Ummah, the better it is for us. Islamists must be fought, and sowing dissent is perhaps a useful way to do that. But yes, I'm sorry, there's no simple answer to your question. It's enormously complicated, and I wish the challenge wasn't so broad, so extensive.
Oh, absolutely. But I think you absolutely were hitting it on the head with following the money trail. I did a lot of that when I was a journalist back in the day. And it absolutely is important to follow the traces of the funding, right?
Sure, and I can give you a few statistics if you want. If you just take American Islam, take American Islam, we have about 5,000 American Islamic registered nonprofits in the United States. About 3,000 of those file tax returns, and you can see therefore their revenue, their assets, their income. All in all, American Islam has about $3.5 billion of assets. About 80% of that is controlled by Islamism. So Islamism has at least $2 billion worth of funds at its disposal. Now, what's interesting is that 20 years ago, if we were talking about this, we would be focusing on money coming from east to west. So we'd be talking maybe about Saudi money moving into mosques across the US. That's no longer true, not only because Saudi no longer funds Islamism, but more because the West is now funding Islamism in the East. So Western Islam is so wealthy and so powerful that Eastern jihadists now rely on it for support and patronage. Switched. So following the money is absolutely vital. And the first thing that needs to be done is shutting down the enormous charitable industry that serves as a funnel for money, not just for jihad, but for ideological Islamist ideas and expansion and propaganda and agitation as well. The challenge is extraordinary. There was one moment where the West had the political capital to go after it, and that was just after 9/11. If we'd made better steps then, we could have shut down Islamist infrastructure globally, but we failed to do that. We did it for a few years, focusing on a few Hamas charities and Al-Qaeda, but that was about it. And then we stopped.
So 23 years ago was an opportunity.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't think we'll see anyone do the right thing again. I mean, Europe is now realizing that it's left it too late. Maybe America will see Europe's mistake and sharpen up, but I doubt it. I think, like London and Berlin, the US will become an increasingly vital medium for jihadists and their money.
Well, also, we'll have to
I just
remind us.
I just want to chip in here and to I agree with all what Sam said. But I want to just say here that part of the issue also, like while monitoring ISIS, for example, the US actually sanctions some financiers and intermediaries, operatives in Africa, for example. That has been after ISIS pivoted towards Africa. The US started to clamp down financially and track all the money. And actually, we have, for example, Abdul Qadir Suela was just added. He's a South African and he's Zambia-based ISIS operative. Hamida Nabagla, also another guy who's financing or funding ISIS in Central Africa. So I agree with Sam, what Sam is saying, because now it seems that ISIS is running out of money because they are under a tremendous, like in Turkey also so many financiers have been tracked down. On the contrary, those Islamists enjoy also what I haven't talked about yet, which is the Al-Qaeda aspect of the global jihad, right?
Sure.
So that would be very interesting because you have Islamists based in the West who are actually having the same actual or even more hard line, to be honest, in my opinion, than the current Al-Qaeda central leadership. Let me give you an example. There is a guy who is actually based in Canada. And this guy, he's a pro Al-Qaeda, a cleric, and he's very, very, very active on Telegram. And this guy, his name is Tariq Abdel Halim. And this guy, he's actually after October 7 attack, he went on and he was inciting against the US. So many posts, you can see them since December 13 all the way. He's Egyptian born, based in Canada. He's publicly, literally publicly calling and inciting against the US, and it's what he calls the American support or funding to Israel. And he actually recently, when the Central Command issued a kind of mourning or eulogy to Ismaili Haniyeh when he lost one of his family relatives, he came out and he said, this is a guy who lives in the West, and he said, we don't know what's happening in Qaeda, who's running it right now, because there is some sort of confusion. So he said they should actually be tougher than this. You don't actually send such eulogy to such people. You have to be really tough. And he said this. He cautioned Al-Qaeda that it was, quote unquote, misleading. You are misleading Muslims through its positive messaging about Hamas. So imagine this guy is living in the West. And he rhetorically asked the Al-Qaeda, where's your campus? Has it been deviated? What's happening? What's happening in the leadership? And he actually went to reveal something very interesting. Maybe the Western media didn't give so much attention. He said, so he said that actually Al-Qaeda, he blamed what he called the confusion on a guy called Mustafa Hamid.
Okay.
Mustafa Hamid, his real name or his nickname is Abu Walid al-Masri. Abu Walid al-Masri is a veteran Arab journalist who lives in Afghanistan. Okay, he lived in Afghanistan for several years, and then this guy claimed to have been close to Al-Qaeda founder Osama bin Laden and al-Zawahiri, and now this guy lives in Iran. And actually, the same Hamid is a regular contributor to Taliban's Arabic language magazine. So very interesting. And he went on, though he didn't. So what I read from this as an analyst is that he's saying that Al-Qaeda is pivoting towards Iran. And he criticized this. And even indirectly, he didn't say it directly, but he is actually saying it indirectly. Moreover, he revealed that the Al-Qaeda central, which is Al-Sahab, which is the central media of Al-Qaeda, he's saying it's now being controlled by this guy. So Hamid. So he's saying that the Al-Sahab editor-in-chief is actually a contributor of Taliban's Sumud publication magazine, and he is now with Saif al-Adl, who's the presumptive Al-Qaeda leader. They are actually pivoting towards Iran. And this guy lives in Canada, and he's saying there is a confusion here. We have to wake up. So just an example, what's happening.
Thank you. No, thank you for pointing this out. You know, I may have met the gentleman you're talking about in Zambia. I was talking about a masjid that I visited when I was there a few years ago. I'll have to talk to you about that offline. Very interesting. So it's this is very alarming. This is very, very alarming. A lot of things that have been discussed today, I think, are new for the audience here. Of course, the Western media has not picked up on these stories. They're very, very important to tell. They're very important for the public to be made aware of. You know, I want to ask everyone, we're getting close to closing out this session. Of course, again, not enough time to discuss this and so many more of the questions that I have, the audience has, but I want to ask that, you know, what steps can be taken by civil society and the international community to work together to dismantle the support structures that the jihadist groups rely on, especially when there's a fear of cultural backlash that exists. For example, if you go and you see something and you want to report it to the authorities, Sam, you know about this all too well too, you've reported on it as well, that you could be seen as being Islamophobic or something, right? And a racist for that matter. So what steps can be taken considering these, you know, challenges by the civil society here in the West and the international community to address the root causes and to, you know, dismantle these support structures the jihadists rely on so heavily?
Well, society's too mad at the moment to worry about being called an Islamophobe. You'll be called something, but for whatever you do. So, you know, if you have the courage to do something in the first place, I think you've got to accept that you're going to be called names. But there's a lot to do, and there's seriously a lot to do. And the biggest problem is that the law is not being enforced. A lot of the solutions to our problems exist already, but the law is not being enforced, which is a political decision. So pressure needs to be applied. A few examples. It is illegal in the United States to operate on behalf of a foreign government, especially if you're lobbying the US government. This, known as the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, is not being enforced. And as quite a lot of Hindus in this country know, there are a lot of Pakistani-funded operatives in the US openly encouraging support for things like the Khalistani cause, openly supporting jihadists in Kashmir, openly lobbying against India. This all has Islamist roots. And FARA could decimate a considerable number of these networks. I mentioned Malaysia earlier, very important, operating. There's also Qatar, Turkey, Iran. All of them have proxies operating in the United States and doing a lot of damage. Then there's the charities, which we've gone into a few times. One charity up in Michigan, Rama Worldwide. Rama openly signed contracts with Hamas. It works with Ghazi Hamid, the Hamas Politburo member, photographed with him in Gaza just 2 days or a month before October 7th. The Department of Justice should have prosecuted this charity, should have designated this charity and prosecuted its leaders. They were breaking material support laws. Again, not enforced. And still today, the FBI won't investigate, the Department of Justice won't indict. So again, enforcing the law could do a huge amount. And we've identified at least 50 charities in the United States controlled by Islamists that are operating in cahoots with foreign Islamists. enforcing the law could do a great deal. There's sanctions law as well. Iranian proxies in this country are openly doing business with IRGC fronts in Iran, and they're getting away with it. They're operating with impunity. Enforce the law. So write to your legislators, set up new pacts or get Hindu pact to ensure that laws are being written, that legislators are asking the executive why they're not indicting. Have your congressman pull a head of Rama Worldwide, of Islamic Relief, of Human Appeal, of all these Islamist charities, drag them to Congress and ask them why they fund Hamas. Then drag the FBI and the DOJ heads and bring them before Congress and ask them why they're not prosecuting. This is what needs to be done. The solutions are clear. Now, there are, of course, additional legislative solutions that could help. Just today, by the way, a chap called Majid Al-Zia was sanctioned by the US Treasury. He's a very prominent British-German Hamas operative. That's a great step. You'll see the US designating overseas Hamas operatives. You will never see them designating or arresting domestic ones. So some more work certainly has to be done on that front. Look, the threat is enormous and broad and widespread, as I've said, and so bits of legislation here and there aren't going to solve it. But you'd be amazed at how much damage we can do if we can suffocate Islamist networks financially. And that takes place right here in the US. That hurts Boko Haram in West Africa. It hurts jihadists in Pakistan and Kashmir. It hurts the Taliban in Afghanistan. Taliban with millions, by the way, through the US, through the charitable sector as well, we believe. And of course, it hurts Hamas and Hezbollah as well, and all other manner of Burrell. We have Deobandi, of Salafi groups all across the globe. This is, I think, where it starts, the fight back, if we can muster it. And Hindus in America can really contribute to this. Absolutely. And they are the same victims as other groups, honestly. I mean, the victim is the wrong word, the targets, right? Victim mentality is from a place of weakness. Of course, the Hindu community comes from a place of strength, operates from a place of strength. So thank you, Sam. Everything that you've said is so true. I personally have reported on FARA violations in the past as well. They went nowhere, absolutely nowhere, but hopefully with, strength in numbers, it will be a different scenario. And what you're saying is also absolutely accurate. The laws are there, they aren't being implemented. And frankly, the same could be said of the Second Amendment, gun laws. They're there, they're not being implemented. And it's all about, the perception. But I'd love to open it up to any closing remarks now before I close it out. Sylvester, I just wanted to thank you, and Romany and Sam, please go ahead.
To second what he said, another aspect will be education, because proper education will help to eliminate this. You see, they catch them young, they teach them when they are little, and everything, and which is exactly what the radicals do here on critical race theory. You don't teach a child to hate somebody. No matter what happened yesterday and so on, you don't teach a child to be wicked, to be evil, and so on. And that is what the jihadists do. They catch them when they are little and they recite the Quran and so on. No one fight for God. God fight for me. God defends me. So you shouldn't be fighting for God. You don't tell a child, hey, if something happens, if you fight for God, you go to paradise or this and that and so on. Secondly, we need to get involved in politics. We need to know who we are voting for. What do they stand for? What kind of people are funding them? Because when you know what they stand for and who funds them, you will know when this kind of thing happens, how they're going to react. That's why many of them are quiet, because they have lobbied them. They have given them money. So they allow them to have their ways. So we need to get involved, properly involved in politics when it comes to election. We shouldn't allow race or religion to kind of sway us, but we must know the kind of policy that will make us live in a beautiful society. Because what I want is what you want, is what every white woman, black woman, white man, every child, we all need the same basic things: peace, security, and liberty.
Thank you.
And yeah. I would just, echo what Sam says in terms of being vigilant, in terms of the propaganda, the media propaganda, these groups, either in the West or overseas, the Salafi jihadi groups. So remaining vigilant and tracking down such narrative and dismantling them. And also remaining vigilant on who wants to join these groups. And the US has actually at the end of December 2020, Karim Nasr is an American citizen, actually was arrested in Nairobi, Kenya. He wanted to join Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So just these things are, this is what should be actually happening. Also, holding those who are living in the West accountable. This is something I don't see at all. Clerics who are known for their, pro-Al-Qaeda, pro-Islamic State ideology should be held accountable, and they should not be using the legal infrastructure of the Western cultures and to manipulate them and escape accountability. Finally, I would say something that is just, on terms of a global level, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda close ties should be exposed and Taliban should be held extremely accountable because of that. Siraj al-Din Haqqani's network is still in bids with Al-Qaeda, and according to the July 10th, monitoring team, Al-Qaeda now operates training camps in Afghanistan in 12 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. And this is, we should say that in our reports. We should not omit or neglect to mention that Al-Qaeda growing infrastructure contradicts claims that Taliban is actually containing or restraining Al-Qaeda. And that should be clear. Al-Taliban in Pakistan is also benefiting from Taliban in Afghanistan, and this should be exposed too. And we have to be honest about who's doing what, who's doing that, especially in terms of jihad. And one final note, I would say that Saif al-Adl, the presumptive Al-Qaeda leader, since the death of the killing of Ayman al-Zawahri in Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, it should be clear, Al-Qaeda did not declare Saif al-Adl. And I would say that's because the other deputy of Al-Qaeda, Abu Muhammad al-Masri, was actually killed in Iran by reportedly Israeli intelligence with the help of the US. And I know that Al-Adl is afraid now to, just Al-Qaeda is afraid to actually, and they actually in this area are doing what ISIS is doing right now, which is keeping their leaders anonymous because they are afraid. Tracking those leaders are very important. That's my
Absolutely. And I think there's another thing. I'm going to close out here, but that Egyptian gentleman that you mentioned, Romani, earlier, sounds like he's the next Yusuf al-Qaradawi. And what this basically does is it shows us that no matter how many heads of these movements that are eliminated, there's always more lurking in the shadows. They'll never be completely disseminated. It's going to be not in our lifetime, I don't believe, but there are ways, and all the efforts that everyone here has suggested, Sam, you know what I mean, followed my trail, everyone has suggested, there are ways to work together to ensure that something is done. I want to thank everyone here for joining us today.